one of the main concepts of a player development program would be this idea of organized training, organized collaboration between the coaches and between the leaders of the organization, whether that be a rec league or a travel organization. Just pulling the people together so that they can talk to each other, get ideas, and that's what it takes to really begin to understand and feel confident in running a practice.
So many decisions are made for today's young player that when they get to, as a high school coach, I'll tell you this, as a high school coach, by the time they get to high school, it's amazing the things that you've got to teach these guys. Episode 4 of the Coaching Life podcast is here. I want to tell you, Pat and I have had an incredible time just sitting around and having conversation about youth sports, about baseball and about coaching, about being parents, and all of the things that he and I actually usually just text message about. We are here talking about it on a podcast. And today we get into a little bit of more specifics about how we might foresee coaches being trained and the ways that coaches might be able to collaborate with one another. And we'll start to get into the issue of practice versus games in today's episode. It'll be about 35 minutes long, and it begins right now. Okay, let me be very clear. I am not against travel ball, and I'm not against rec ball. I'm not pro-travel ball or pro-rec ball or anti-travel ball and anti-rec ball or whatever. I think a lot of people got a misunderstanding when they read my article about describing a player development model for a league. And when I said that I had an idea to start a new structure, blow up your existing one and start a new structure, because I think it'd be hard to do. We'll talk about whether or not it's going to be easy to implement in an existing structure. I think it can be done. But I think what happened was people took a one side or the other approach to reading that, right? Yeah. They gave it a reading of it's one or the other. And I think what I want to say is, I'll just say this, and I told you this the other day, Pat. If the current state of rec ball as I know it, or as I see it, and the current state of travel ball were literally the only two options to choose from, I would still choose travel ball today. Mm-hmm. And so for those saying you're against travel ball, I'm not. In fact, I think it's the best option depending on what the goals are of the child that's playing. But I like what you said. Do you remember what you said? I have it written down.
You have it written down?
Yeah.
I'm going to say something, and you tell me if it was what I said. I think when you say travel ball or rec ball, it's a little vague. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of different recreational leagues across the country. There's a bunch of different travel organizations, and they can be ran differently from one to the next. And really what we're talking about is how those are being ran. So
based on our experience.
It's true.
The only way we can speak about something is our own experience, and that's solely all we have is our own experiences. And we live in a world where you get a chance to see and hear other people's experiences with social media and all the different avenues to get to hear other people's stories. And so we kind of have an idea, but we're still not in those particular circumstances.
Sure. There may be a rec league in California that runs exactly how we think, a player development program should be running.
I'm sure there are.
And in that case, we would say we love that rec league.
Yep. If that's what they're calling it. Yeah. If they're calling it because there are some travel programs that also run player development programs, primarily the way we're going to describe it. And we would say, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do travel ball. And so I think, like you said, you also said this, and I'll think I'm going to quote you on this. All right, that maybe a better statement would be, if I had to choose an option between travel ball or rec ball, my choice would be whichever one of those programs most resembles a player development model.
Gotcha.
And
those were great words.
Those were awesome words, Pat. Those were the words of my friend and colleague Patrick Martin here. And so I would say that would make a good segue for us today in talking more specifically and continuing the conversation about player development and what are some of the components that we think are vitally important in that. And so I think if we outline our goals today, we want to continue to pick up on we need to, I think, further explain what we mean about coaches being trained. We talked about coaches being self-motivated for personal development, but we want to talk about how, from a leadership standpoint, we believe that that's a value for a player development model, that leadership would provide training to help coaches be prepared as prepared as they could possibly be in practice. But also, we want to talk about the idea of more practice, less games.
Yes.
And maybe if we have time, we'll get into the structure a little bit. Just start to outline a year-long model of what it might look like. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, I know last episode we did talk about the coaching aspect and, empowering coaches to run better practices and things like that. But one of the main concepts of a player development program would be this idea of organized training, organized collaboration between the coaches and between the leaders of the organization, whether that be a rec league or a travel organization. Just pulling the people together so that they can talk to each other, get ideas, and that's what it takes to really begin to understand and feel confident in running a practice, is just getting ideas from other people and being able to practice those ideas over and over again, yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a very important part of this idea that we're talking about.
So you're saying from a board or organizational standpoint, there needs to be an intention of providing regular, routine coaches training and ideas and hands-on practice planning, training and hands-on practice planning. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'd say I think maybe curriculum might be a good word to describe it.
That's the word I was looking for.
So, and that can come together in a number of ways. If the organization that we're talking about has a group of people that are comfortable and confident in creating practice plans and talking about different skills and techniques that they believe is important to youth baseball or softball or whatever sport we're talking about, they would be able to share that. In other ways, it could come together by just collaboration amongst the coaches. I know that there are a lot of people in the Big Bend Youth League, which is the recreational league in southeastern Ohio, that know a lot of things about practice and know a lot of things about softball and baseball. I'm not for sure how much they're able to share that information with people. And I think, it's intimidating for someone that doesn't know as much to ask. And I even feel this sometimes when I'm talking to people that, if I disagree with them from a fundamental perspective, if they're saying I teach my kids to do this, and I'm thinking I'm not for sure I agree with that. I even have difficulty saying, I don't agree with that, and here's why. So just to again, the podcast is about conversation, and opening up that conversation is important.
Yeah, if you have an environment where coaches have an understanding that this is an open conversation, an open discussion, and if someone disagrees about a certain fundamental or way that maybe you teach something or coach something, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong, because there could be a lot of right ways to do something in the game of baseball or softball or really any sport that you might be playing. There are some things where I think there's a right and wrong way to do it as well. But it also doesn't mean that person's attacking you personally.
Right.
I think we live in a day where it seems like anytime someone disagrees with you, you feel like it's a personal attack. And we've got to get beyond that, especially as coaches. We got to be thicker skinned than that. We got to be able to say, okay, yeah, let me consider that. I mean, the whole reason why I go to coaches trainings myself is to find out areas where I'm wrong, areas where I can adjust my approach in how I handle things. And so I think that's a great idea. But let me ask you this. Do you think coaches would take advantage? Do you think coaches would actually do that? Do you think, because we're talking about dad coaches and mom coaches here. We're talking, for the most part, most of our coaches in local youth league settings or travel ball settings are in some way related to one of the kids on that team, and usually it's by being a parent. Do they have time to do that kind of thing? When would that actually take place? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's difficult. And as I'm sitting here, I'm not really for sure that a lot of people would take advantage of it or would want to take advantage of it. We'd have to do something that would entice them or make it easier for that collaboration to happen, make it easier for the share of information to take place. I'm not for sure.
Yeah.
Offhand, how easy that would be.
Yeah.
I think there's other leagues that we know of that make it mandatory.
Right.
They have to do it to a certain point. Mandatory it's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people.
That word is a turnoff, but I almost think you have to go that route. We've got to change the way we think about how we do youth sports. We have to change the way we think about it. If the way you typically, honestly, you're probably involved in some sport in some way or another every night of the week. We understand that because a lot of families have more than one child as well. So you're running one child to soccer practice, the other child to baseball practice, the other child to ballet, another child to piano lessons. And so we understand not all parents have the opportunity to do that. We're not talking about every parent coming to this, although I think it would be valuable to host regular parent sessions as well, parent training as well for how
Sure.
to, how to handle, the car ride home. That conversation in and of itself would be a great one for every parent to attend. But back to the coaches, if we want to do better, and that's why we're having this whole player development conversation. If we want to do better, then we have to be willing to change our priorities a little bit about how we're spending our time. If you're practicing your team 3 nights a week and we're playing 3 games a weekend, so that's 50-50 right there, maybe one of those practices, I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe one of those practices during the week, you're actually going for 2 hours instead of an hour and a half. If you have an hour and a half long, time slots for practicing, maybe you're going for 2 hours, and everyone, the first half an hour is all the coaches sitting down together, and so at least once a week we have this conversation and this training, and and maybe you begin the week that way, the Monday or practice. I don't know how it works. We're not talking structurally right now, but I think we have to kind of, whenever we're talking conceptually, we have to go that route to see if in our minds it really would make sense.
Yeah.
And I think it would. I think depending on what the structure is, I think you could make it work, and it has to do with the fact that we've got to think differently about how you structure your week of youth ball,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like.
I think a lot of people are probably, as they're listening to this, depending on what side spectrum they're on, they're probably saying, I'm not really interested.
A lot
in
of
that.
eye rolling,
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, sure. But I know several people in my mind right now that I think once they started having these collaboration sessions, the people that are very confident, very knowledgeable about the game that they're coaching would begin to enjoy sharing that information with other people. And the people that are a little bit behind and, aren't as knowledgeable as others would begin to enjoy absorbing the information.
Right.
I know for me, that's, I would say over the past 7 to 8 years, I've really started to enjoy learning about the game of baseball. It sounds like a very weird concept because, like I said, I mentioned before, I've been coaching for a long time, been playing, but you don't understand really that you are constantly trying to develop yourself into becoming a coach or a player or whatever it is. And when you finally embrace that, it does become fun. To kind of gather information and be able to pick things out of games and pick things out of practice that you do agree with or you don't agree with or that you're not sure about, and then you go home and you're able to study it and watch video and things like that. So I think it would benefit. At first, people are rolling their eyes, but I think it would catch on. I really do.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. There is something energizing about going to places that you haven't yet been. And that includes in your mind, in your understanding of things, and also, and just from a real relational level and behavioral level. Who are you? You're everybody at this meeting, this coaches meeting, that is, this coaches training, whatever you would call it. They're coaching a team, and that team is probably playing in a particular league, and who are you playing against? One another. So you're in a room together on a weekly basis, and sometimes games can get a little heated.
Sure.
And you have a tendency to think that person across the other dugout isn't human. Well, this really humanizes everyone when you sit down and you start to learn a little bit from each other, and you talk to each other, and the relationships start to build. Maybe when you show up to the game, you're a little more, a little more cordial to one another in the heat of competition, because that cordiality can go out the window when a lot of times when competition starts to get flared up, and let's go another level here. Let's invite an umpire to come in. Let's invite someone who knows their stuff about the officiating the games to come in to a couple of those meetings as well. So those are you talk about humanizing people. Those are the ones we need to understand. These guys are human. Yeah. These gals, I mean, we tend to think umpires are machines and they should do everything exactly right, while we sit over there in the dugout and we make 50% errors too,
Sure.
in our coaching and the decisions that we make as well. And so I think that would be another level of helping the overall problems in the game today, in the youth game today, because officiating and relationships between coaches and officials and parents and officials is a huge problem.
And I think that's a great point, because in our rec leagues now, in my experience, again, it could be different in different places. We've kind of let the community aspect of the league go, and now we have our coaches now. The coaches coach, the parents parent or cheer, they're the fans, and we have umpires that come in. Some leagues even have people come take care of the fields. When I was playing baseball, a long time ago. Those were roles that the same people played, and the coaches would umpire. The coaches would get the fields ready. The parents would coach. The parents would umpire. And as a relationship perspective, when you looked across the field and you seen a base umpire that you didn't agree with make a bad call, it was easier to let that go, because you knew that in a couple of days you were going to be in the same spot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you knew, you know that person's doing the best they can, just like you are. So that's a great point. And I think we've moved away from that a little bit in our rec league. I would say
everything's compartmentalized now.
Yeah.
You have someone to work on the field. You have someone that schedules umpires, and the umpires show up. You may not even, your only interaction with the umpire might just be, even if you do a home plate meeting at rec games or whatever. I know in travel games you do.
Sure.
That may be your only interaction with that person. But you're right. We have gotten away from that, or at least in our experience. Maybe someone's listening out there from Illinois or Arizona, and they're like, well, no, in our league we still do it that way. And really, it even is that way a little bit in the local league, the Sandlot League that I'm familiar with, but only in the younger ages. I think only in 8U the parents will umpire.
Gotcha.
And 8U can get pretty testy sometimes.
Definitely.
So that's good. Those
are sometimes those games, I'd say more consistently, the 8U games are closer than the 10U games. But to make a counterpoint to this, just so everyone knows that we're not picking on rec leagues, I would say a problem that I've seen with travel ball just in the last few years is that the umpires there are tasked. The umpires are in travel tournaments. Umpires are tasked, more importantly than getting calls right, they're tasked to make sure the games stay on schedule.
Yeah.
So
that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem with the whole structure of tournament play and adding too many teams into a tournament that you have fields for and time to play games, and then you end up with pool games that are an hour and 10 minutes long, and the umpire, first thing they do is they bring the timer and put it up on the fence and set that timer. And I remember the first year that I remember playing travel ball and having the time limit games, the timer wouldn't start until after that home plate meeting and the first pitch was thrown. Now these guys are starting the timer and then having the coach's home plate meeting, and you're standing out there thinking to yourself, I don't want to shoot the bull out here with you because we're on the clock.
Yeah,
So by the time you actually, if the game is an hour and 30 minutes long, by the time you actually throw the first pitch, you might be an hour and 15-minute long game because you stand there forever and go over the ground rules. And it's tough. And you've got drop dead scenarios where the game will drop dead, and so you don't really truly. One team's got some momentum and they're making a comeback, and if you really played out a full 7 innings, it's most likely that team would have won. But because of this, game drop dead because the next one's coming in. Yeah, you're right.
This may be a good segue, because the rationale to defend that, to say, well, that's okay that happens, is usually at least we got to play a game.
Yeah.
At least we got some game time in.
Yeah.
As opposed to the practice time.
One of our big sticking points with introducing a player development program and contrasting it with today's current models of travel baseball, travel tournaments, and also rec ball, because this is one of the points that I think when I was writing, I mentioned that maybe at this point in time, rec league representatives were going, yeah, down with travel ball. They play too many games. But then if you stop to think about it, the same problem exists in rec ball, where once you start playing games, you may be down to 1 practice a week, 2 at the most, perhaps, but the majority of the time you're playing games.
Right.
So one of the points that we're about to talk about, the point that we're about to talk about is in the world of youth ball, they need more practice time, and they could probably handle playing fewer games. You're playing travel ball right now. I mean, your kids are. Mm-hmm. How many games do you think? I mean, do you have a number or maybe a ballpark in your mind that you just this summer? How many games have you played when you tally up all the weekend tournaments, and how have you played those games? Did you do any midweek games or?
All of ours have been on the weekends. I think we're.
What age are you talking about?
This would be our 13U team.
Okay, 13U.
We have only played 19 games. We had.
Oh wow.
Yeah, we had some kids. It's 13U, so we had some junior high kids. They had junior high league, and so we got started a little later than we normally do. I think typically we normally play around 35 games in the last couple of years. But
how many tournaments would that be?
Well, I think we've played in 5 tournaments this year. So we're not like what you would consider a traditional travel team. I've told people this before.
Okay.
We actually do spend a lot of time practicing, and as we've went through the season, we try to get 2 practices a week. But still, we'll play at least 3 games a weekend, and usually 4.
Yeah.
So
depending
right now
on
we're 19,
if you're playing on Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Exactly. And I would say we're teetering around a 2-to-1 ratio.
Well, that's good.
But that's
that's an example of a team that I wouldn't have any contention with.
Yeah. Well, I think if you asked us, we would like to practice more. But
so why don't you?
It's a time thing, and kids are doing a lot of things, and you worry about burnout.
So these are kids that are in junior high, and so they're probably being called upon to come to basketball open gym and football workouts.
We have
soccer.
A handful of our players that actually played in the league for a good chunk of our baseball travel season. So they're playing 2 sports, and they're practicing that as well. So it's just one thing on top of another.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do practice quite a bit, not as much as we would like to. Mm-hmm. I think a good thing that we could implement into our program would be the extra half an hour that you mentioned earlier, and getting the coaches all on the same page from this is what we're going to do today. This is how I teach it. How do you teach it? We have the coaching staff has a good chemistry, so we're able to adjust to things like that pretty well. But it doesn't always work that way, and I've been in situations where there is a disagreement. You get into a drill, one coach is running a line over here, another coach is running a line over here, and he's screaming one thing, and she's screaming something else.
That's a lot of fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you just kind of look at each other like, what? Time out. Let's talk. But it normally
you would have liked to have had the opportunity to discuss that before you're in front of the kids, because now.
Exactly.
Yeah, when there's a lot of confusion.
Now there's a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I'd say your team is atypical in terms of what most travel teams look like. When I think back to my own kids' experience, Brock, my son, played travel ball from 12 years old until 18 years old, and basically until he went to college. And the games increase in volume the older you get, because you're playing more games to have the opportunity, I guess, to get in front of more coaches. But on an average, I would say they played 7 to 8 tournaments a summer, and you're playing at minimum 4 games. We would typically play 6 to 8 games a weekend. And so I as I look back and think back to their different summertime records, they were between 42 and 55 games probably, a summer, which is a lot of ball games. There were a couple times when I know when during his younger years, we tried to the teams tried to have the midweek game, the Wednesday game as well, and that was tough because if you played 6 games on the weekend, that midweek game. I mean, colleges only play 4 games on the weekend,
right?
So that midweek game, who's going to pitch it, and when are you practicing? And so we would. I remember his team would typically practice once a week, and then play all those games on the weekend.
And I would say in the past, this year has probably been as an outlier for us because we've had a thinner schedule than we have in the past. Because when you start stacking tournaments up week after week, one weekend you're here, the next weekend you're there. If you do that 2 or 3 weekends in a row, the kids get tired. You want to give them a day off, and then you basically have 4 days. You don't really want to go on Friday because they're probably going to be at the ballpark at 8, 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. So now you have 3 days to work with, and the fit 2 practicing there, that's rough. So I'm not saying that that's the norm, what we've always done. I think we've kind of been fortunate. And now as I sit here thinking, I'm not really for sure we're at 2-1, but I would say we're probably approaching that point at this stage. So,
well, good for you guys. Why would we suggest such a thing? Why are we saying in a player development model we'd be okay with playing less games because we would have a value of having more practice, more instruction time, and more training than game time. And the reason why I say that is because that's the whole idea of what player development is. And so we want to help them also fall in love with the idea of development. And so if they look at practice as, I got to go to practice, and they're going to look at that when it's not very well organized. It's a lot slower paced, standing around. And so I guess, I don't want to loop back to things that we've already talked about, but the reason why I think people don't like the idea of having more practice and fewer games is because we're not very good practice planners.
Right.
We don't run practices very well, and so we kind of have to go back. It comes back again to that coach's training. It comes back again to providing the tools to those who are leading these kids on the field with to be able to create effective practices and to be able to create high energy practices where they are not feeling like it's a slower pace, and to implement some fun in there. I mean, you said last night your kids' 10U team was playing wiffle ball for the last 30 minutes or more, right?
I think we played for about an hour.
Yeah. So there was no coaching going on, just those guys playing wiffle ball, and that's it, having fun, and they were learning how to run the bases and play themselves, or was there coaching going on at all?
There was no coaching. The rule was no coaching, but there was a little bit of instruction going on from the fans, but From the fans. You had fans there for a wiffle ball game? We had fans, and normally the coaches of the two teams, we had an 8U team and a 10U team kind of mixed together. Uh-huh. So the coach's job was to remind the fans that they were not allowed to do anything but be positive and to encourage. So they found at times they found some unique ways to do that. They would be positive be real positive in their tone as they instructed, tried to work around it. But the only interaction was supposed to be if the kids had an argument and they couldn't agree, they could appeal to the coaches for a final decision. Yeah. That was it.
You didn't let them just fight it out?
We didn't let it go because I think there's value in that.
I do
for
too.
Sure.
I do too.
And there were some.
I
arguments.
even talked about that when I wrote the articles. Like sometimes I remember coming to blows.
Sure. And a couple times there was an argument, and I could see
people want to be quick to jump into
it.
They
did.
Yes.
They'd start to stir, and I would say, "Hey, well, hold on a second."
Conflict resolution is such an important skill to learn.
That's a good point.
And there's
as people, not just as baseball players. Yeah. And that's, I think,
one of the best places to learn it is out there on the ball diamond.
That's true. That's a great point.
Yeah.
It was a good time.
I'll tell you this story, and this is actually one that I talked about in my writing. The idea of pickup games and unstructured free play was something that we noticed when our kids were pretty young, that it just wasn't happening very much anymore. And so I was talking to a friend of mine, and we said, how can we make this happen? Because everything was structured, everything was we recognized that the only time kids played ball was when they had their uniforms on or when they had to go to an organized practice. They just weren't doing it on their own. And we understand that times have changed, and heck, I mean, now it's hard for kids to get on a ball field because they're all locked up. They're gated and locked up, and they're scheduled, they're planned, they're prepared, the fields are prepped and ready for the games that night, and so it's hard to find some place to go play. And so one of the things that we had an idea to do was we played most of our games back. I'm talking, this is back when my son was 9-10 years old. So we played most of our games during the week. We had practice during the week, and then we had one game during the week, and then 2 games on Saturday. So we'd play 3 games a week, and then a couple practices. And then we decided that we knew that from the teams that were playing in this was a recreation league. So from the teams that were playing in this recreation league, we were going to choose a select group of kids as all-stars to go and play a handful of tournaments that would be all-star tournaments. So instead of waiting until the end of the season to select these kids and say, okay, these are our all-stars, just from watching them play in the regular season league, we decided to try to go ahead and pull some kids into what we called a Sunday ball type of ordeal and see how they competed with one another a little bit sooner, so we could get a better idea of who might be those candidates for that all-star team. And so we had Sunday ball. We called it Sunday ball. And this is the way Sunday ball was structured. We told everyone, it's going to be, we would invite, as many as 26, 27 kids to come. And if not all of them could make it, it wasn't that big of a deal. But what happened was they would all show up. We would make sure that we'd get them warmed up. We split the time in half. It was 2 hours long. The first hour was well structured. It was coaches involved in helping the kids learn how to get properly warmed up, how to get their muscles activated so they could be ready to play. Basically get them all doing the same throwing program, the throwing progression, so that they were all got their arms loose. And then we would do what we called a skill and a drill. So we'd pull them together and we'd say, okay, we're gonna talk through a couple of things outfield skills. We would do infield skills. We would do sometimes the drill would be catchers. We'd have them all work through learning how to do catchers drills. Same for pitchers. But depending on what that week was, we would do a skill and a drill. So we'd teach the skill and then we'd run a drill that would reinforce what they just learned. And usually it would be 2 different things. So we could split the groups up and we would do, outfield, and we'd switch after 15 minutes or so. And so that first hour was that kind of structure. The second hour, we divided them up. So one of the coaches, while we were running the skill and the drill, one of the coaches' job was to take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle and write half the kid's name on this side, half the kid's name on this side. He was going to try to even them up, by ability as much as possible, and post that in the dugout and say, okay, the second half, we're playing a game. But here's the rules of the game. Once you see what teams you're in, this is your batting order, all right? But coaches and parents are going to go outside the fence and sit in a lawn chair. Catchers are going to call balls and strikes. All right, so we trust our catchers to understand the strike zone, and you do that. And you're going to call your own outs, safe and out at the bags. You're not going to have any base coaches. Parents and coaches are just going to say, great job, Johnny. Nice catch.
All positive, yeah. Encouragement.
That's it. There's no coaching allowed. In fact, if we heard any coaching, we were allowed to call that person out.
Right.
We're allowed to say, stop.
That's fun.
Don't do it. And we told the parents, get ready. It might be chaos. I mean, there might be some disagreement. There might be things. You might see swings that you don't like. They might swing at something way over their head, and you're going to want to yell at them about it. But you can't do it. Don't do it. We're going to let these guys play. We're going to let them make their own decisions about when to take an extra base and when to stop and when to slide and when to stay up and when what bag they should be throwing the ball to, what cutoff man they should be hitting. Everything was completely pickup at that point.
Sounds like a great practice.
And yeah, it ended up, they learned how to make decisions that normally were made for them.
Right.
And that's a big thing.
It is.
So many decisions are made for today's young player that when they get to, as a high school coach, I'll tell you this, as a high school coach, by the time they get to high school, it's amazing the things that you've got to teach these guys.
Yep.
I mean,
and that's the biggest difference, I think, now between, when we were playing, or, beyond when we were playing and when kids are playing now, is they don't have that play. And I actually, on our next episode, I'd like to share a theory that came to me about this concept, and see what people think about it. So I'm excited about that.
Let's start right there then for the next episode.
Okay.
All right. When we come back, Pat's going to share a theory about
unstructured free play.
Unstructured free play. And that's how we'll begin next time. We're glad that you are sticking with us here. If you have anything that you would like to share with us, if you've been listening to the podcast now for a couple weeks and you want to give us your thoughts, please feel free you can email me. I'm at cstewart, that's CSTEWART 1993 @gmail.com. And Pat, where can they find you?
I'm Patrick_Martin at yahoo.com. I'm also on Twitter.
And I am as well.
Patrick__Martin.
Oh, two of them.
The other one was taken.
Okay. And I'm at cstewart 1993, and that's my Twitter handle as well as Facebook or Instagram. So if you want to reach out in any of those, whatever you prefer, please do. I've already gotten a couple of messages from people, and I don't even know where some of these folks are from, but I just got one today from a guy who's a high school coach, and he said that he actually has a meeting set up tonight with 5 or 6 other commissioners of a neighboring town of baseball programs, and he's rolling this idea out to them. I mean, he's read, all he's done is read the article. He hasn't, because we, at this point of recording, we haven't released any of these podcast episodes yet, so he hasn't heard any of this talk yet. So, but he said that he's excited about it. He says he knows it's a long play, understands that it's not going to happen overnight. In fact, we're talking about a change that probably is going to take 4 to 5 years to fully happen. And I'm telling you right now, get used to, folks, if you're listening to this, get used to hearing player development, because the PDP, it is going to happen. It's coming. There is a lot of buzz right now around the travel ball world. I don't know about rec ball as much, but around the travel ball world, there's a lot of buzz right now about things have got to change. And I'm talking specifically for those younger levels. You have similarities in the older ones as well, but when you get I'm talking 15U down, 16, 17, 18U, there's a lot of issues as well, and we'll get into the differences and why those are different. But I think a little bit differently about those. I think it is important for those guys to go out and play in more tournaments, because that is where the college coaches are.
Right.
I do think that we can create a structure that will help begin to bring coaches to us, and we will definitely outline that in the next couple episodes. But get used to hearing PDP, because it's not going away.
No,
it's not going away. It's only going to become even more important.
We'll see you next episode.